Okay, so that was a bit of a surprise. Turns out the maximum length of time that I can record is 15 minutes. Okay, I get it now. We've just been talking about um, teleopoesis and the invention of tradition and so on. So the point is that myths and legends have uses. So there's nationalistic myths and legends. It's always politically valuable, culturally valuable to claim that you have the oldest culture, the longest running culture. In the case of South Korea in particular, they have a conflictual relationship with Japan for reasons of colonialism. So it's very important for them. It has been very important for them nationalistically to to kind of argue that they have an older culture than Korea, than Japan, and to often discover ancient ancient lineages and ancient traditions, even if they have to sort of invent them a bit or fudge the truth. So obviously, in a post-colonial context, it's very valuable for that nation, for that state, and for the culture and society to have a strong sense of identity. So appealing to what was there before the colonizers came can be seem really important, from not just from a neutral history kind of point of view, but also from a sense of saving the past and respecting the past and honoring the past and bringing it back to life, but also politically and ideologically. So if you watch kind of a film like Raiders of the Lost Ark, for instance, there's a claim in that film that the Nazis were absolutely nuts for history, and it's true because there was a kind of Nazi archaeology and Nazi history. They would often kind of invade and capture areas of historical interest so that they could find evidence of an ancient Aryan culture, so that they could claim that the Aryan race was the superior race from times gone by and therefore superior today, and to justify the kind of political, not political, but genocidal policies that went along with the ideology. But so myths and legends have all kinds of uses. So myths and legends such as the myth of the ancient Shaolin Temple in China, for instance. That's a very, very famous case. Um, and there's an interesting, I mean, the Shaolin Temple has long taught martial arts, but it's certainly not the birthplace of martial arts. The idea of there being one birthplace is a massive mythological simplification. All cultures develop, you know, self-defense and military capacities and military training and so on. All societies do. The Shaolin Temple in China is not the birthplace of Chinese martial arts, and is not the birthplace of all martial arts. It's just a place, and actually, it became mythologized and regarded as. Hang on, I need to turn my email off. Let's hope that hasn't caused any problems. It became mythologized as the birthplace of martial arts, largely thanks to films such as the Shaolin Temple, which popularized it, and it was reopened in the 1980s, and it became a tourist destination, and people go there. Westerners and even people in China and people the world over believe that the Shaolin Temple is the origin and birthplace and the cradle of martial arts in the world, and it's not a now. It's really important for the kind of public relations imagery of the PRC, People's Republic of China, or the public relations of China, um, and it's it's a source of income as well. I mean, it's a tourist destination. So in the past, there were strongly nationalistic reasons for inventing the idea of a national physical cultures. Um, the notion, well, I was going to put this in, but I'll put it as an aside now. So the ideas of sport, the very idea of sport, and the dominant concept of sport that we have in the world today is arguably a kind of a British paradigm. It was people have said that one of the things that the British Empire gave to the world was the notion of sport. And and ideologically, sport, say if you think about football or cricket, was part of the ideological mission of that was to kind of inculcate behaviours and inculcate values in colonial subjects. Senses of fair play and senses of rules and senses of the team and all the rest of it. But people have suggested that there are local, regional kind of eminently post-colonial takes on sports. So that, for example, there's a different tradition of football in Latin America than there is in Europe, because what happened was that local traditional cultural values were infused into the sporting practices. So ideas of trickery and deception and pretense, for example. So there's the long running dispute, the long running stereotypes of kind of Latin American footballers as too dramatic and pretending that they've injured themselves and so on. Arguably, this is a kind of, I'm simplifying in the extreme, but a kind of cultural infusion into something that was meant to be by the colonizers, something different. So you have this dialectic between nationalism and post-colonialism, shall we say, in this example. But simplifying in the extreme, we can say that a lot of cultural practices, as we know them, have played a role in nation building in the past. In some contexts, still very much so. So you can look at cultural practice and argue, well, what is the nationalistic ideological function of this practice? But also nowadays, it's connected in heavily with into tourism. So these are some, the Shaolin monks doing their worldwide tours, and people going to. I like this because it seems to have these sort of faux ancient pictures here, these faux engravings on top of the contemporary performance. So the idea of the ancient becomes like a brand, essentially, that is incorporated within the contemporary physical practice. And practitioners of these styles do often believe that they are very much embodying an ancient and unbroken embodied tradition. And so now you see you have the emergence of what you might call the pilgrimage industry around body practices. So this is an example of people, largely Westerners, who go to places like Kerala and other places in India to learn authentic, true, ancient Indian yoga. So they go there for a few months maybe, and then they become yoga teachers and they get a certificate, and they come back to Britain or to America or to Germany, and they're yoga teachers. Where did you learn yoga? Oh, you learned it in India. Oh, see, and it gives that extra cultural capital. There's that extra kudos, the extra. We'll use the concept of cultural capital there from Pierre Bourdieu, because it has a sort of stamp of authenticity, because you learned your yoga in the historical, ostensible birthplace, cradle of yoga, India or Kerala. So the idea of authentic in bodily practices also becomes part of the affectation, part of the package, right? So it's still a construct. I'm not saying that if you go to India, if you go to a boot camp in India, you're not going to get some fantastic yoga. What I'm saying is that it becomes part of a construct that has a semiotic value, and it has kudos attached to it, and it's better than, well, where did you learn yoga? Well, I learned it down at the local sports centre. Doesn't sound quite as good as I went to Kerala and I spent 8 hours a day every day, learning yoga. So nowadays there's a kind of pilgrimage industry. So it's where nation becomes brand. It's also where ethnicity becomes brand. So I talked about this earlier, and I talked about it in the first half of the lecture. Okay, so you can look at practices and think, well, practices that become products, practices as products. And I'll just conclude at this point. So I've concluded with this picture of a book called In Search of Legitimacy by Laura Miller Griffith. When we look at a practice, right? So if you're going to think about doing your essays and your essay plans, Think about what way it seems to be connected to some kind uh, uh, of ideology. Like, what ideological work is it doing? What ideological work is the practice doing for the practitioner? Like, what what what's position are they embodying? Right? Are they embodying teacher or sage? Are they embodying expert ethnic authority, or are they embodying authenticity? And all these terms are in inverted commas here, because all of these practices and terms are constructs. Okay, the idea of an ancient body, the idea of an ancient practice, is never neutral, never innocent. It's always invoked for some kind of reason. It might also be true. Yeah, it might be an ancient practice. Right? It might be an ancient, unbroken tradition, but it has a cultural function. It has a semiotic function. It often has a financial function, an economic function, often nationalistic, sometimes ethnic, sometimes connected in with a cultural politics of race, or gender, or class. So we can think about all these things. Certain practices, like I've ended with capoeira here. Capoeira is a supposedly Afro-Brazilian. I say supposedly. It's an Afro-Brazilian martial art, but people have interest in it because it seems so complicated and cool. Like Westerners like it because it seems post-colonial and edgy. It was presented as slaves devised it, and the question was, I mentioned this in an earlier lecture. The question was, did they invent it in Brazil, or is it brought directly from Africa, unbroken, or like what is the status of this practice? And also ideologically, it seems to have a lot of values associated with it around community and tradition, even if those traditions are invented relatively recently. People like to fantasize that traditions are ancient. So I'll leave it there. And I'll just reiterate the invitation that you email me, or that we have a Skype interview tutorial. Yeah. Um, any questions, let me know. And I'll see you again soon, hopefully. Okay, bye.